Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
And welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth with me, your host, Peter Robbins. Today is a special show for a number of reasons. The first of which is it brings back a dear friend and a colleague I have tremendous respect for, and his co-author on a new and very important book. Co-authors Steve Aspin and Dr. Andreas Lück collaborated in writing Investigating the Impossible for over 2 years in a project to present and explain current scientific data available on the UAP issue to the wider public. The authors share both a professional background in the medical sciences and a deep interest in the UAP issue. Steve Aspin has a professional background in marketing, sales, and business management, and worked for 35 years in the fields of surgical and medical diagnostics. In 1999, he founded and managed a successful international business designing, patenting, and marketing innovative surgical devices to the global marketplace. Retired from business life in 2018, Steve became a published author in 2022 with Out of Time, the Intergenerational Abduction Program Explored. Again, a paradigm-shifting book for me. He has traveled extensively to lecture on the UAP issue and has been a featured guest on more than 40 radio shows, podcasts, and panel discussions. In October of 2023, he was invited to deliver the keynote lecture to the annual conference of the Interdisciplinary Society for the Analysis of Anomalous Phenomena in Obing near Munich, Germany. As a result of this meeting, Steve came to know Dr. Andreas Lück, a member of the IGAAP Executive Board, a fortuitous meeting which led to the cooperative project to co-author Investigating the Impossible. In March of last year, Steve was invited by Southampton University Psychology Department to debate against renowned skeptic Dr. Christopher French, Emeritus Professor of Anomalistic Psychology at London's Goldsmiths University. In open forum before a lecture theater full of students and faculty members, Steve won the debate on the empirical reality of the phenomena as decided by a popular vote from the audience, who rejected Dr. French's contention that anomalistic psychology might explain these reported experiences. Steve lives with his wife in a quiet and very beautiful, I might add, corner of Eastern England, and may be found most early mornings walking his rough collie across the Lincolnshire wolds. Dr. Andreas Lück was born in Minden, a middle-sized city in northern Germany. He has a PhD and MS in a master's degree in molecular biology, biochemistry, genetics, and cell biology. After earning his PhD, he spent 3 years as a postdoctoral research fellow at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, part of Harvard University Medical School, where he conducted state-of-the-art research in advanced genetics, immunohistochemistry, and generating antibodies. Following his postdoc time at Harvard Medical School, Dr. Lück was appointed professor of medical biochemistry, genetics, and cell biology at the American University of Antigua College in Medicine, where in addition to his professional role, he was appointed Associate Dean of Admissions and Associate Dean of Academic Matters on his return to his native Germany. In addition to his regular teaching role, he continued to practice as a consultant to international institutions of higher education in matters of admissions, academics, and accreditation. Dr. Lück has had numerous scientific papers published on cellular biology, molecular biology, and genetics in accrediting peer-reviewed journals, often as first author main contributor. Dr. Lück has been interested in the UFO-UAP phenomena since his teenage years, when he had a close encounter of the first type UAP encounter in his hometown of Minden. Today, Dr. Lück lives in Wolfgast, a small town on the coast of the Baltic Sea. He is a member of the German UFO-UAP research group, IGAAP, and an old and established organization it is, and contributes actively to research in this field. Gentlemen, Steve, Andreas, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth.
Hi, Peter.
Thank you for having us.
My pleasure. And Andreas, Dr. Lück, a pleasure to meet you. And again, my apologies to you both for the technical problems at the top of the show. I almost don't know where to start, except that I do because I have good notes. Steve and I go back many years, and when he published Out of Time, just a few short years ago, it really was an experience for me of a bellwether, a change in the level of research around the abduction phenomena, a subject that I have been particularly dedicated to all these years. Both of you have tackled, I guess, several of the most challenging subjects and cases, and by extension, implications of these phenomena of almost any authors that I know in contemporary UFO studies. Can we begin with my asking you how the two of you, after meeting, decided to write a book, not just about a very controversial discovery of mummies in Central America that did not seem human, but outsider cases like that. How did it begin for you, gentlemen?
Steve, your turn.
Well, as you recounted in your introduction a couple of minutes ago, I was invited to speak at the IGAAP annual conference in Obing near Munich in October 23. Andreas wasn't able to be there in person, but he did give a Zoom presentation to the conference. And after the conference, within a week or two, he contacted me because he'd seen my presentation on their YouTube channel, and he was full of questions about Out of Time. So we started talking actually every Sunday for a few weeks. We had a regular link up on a Sunday afternoon, and I became acquainted with Andreas's previous work on these rather controversial and unusual subjects. And because he's a scientist, he's a molecular scientist and geneticist, he focused exclusively on what the physical scientific forensic evidence was for all these things. So Andreas's work had only been, up to that time, available in the German language. His presentations were available in the German language, and their written papers, which he'd published, were only available in the German language. So we started to discuss how we might translate them into English and present them to the world, because I thought they were so important and so interesting. And that's how things started from my perspective. Andreas, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I can add a little more to that. Steve is completely right. My previous work was only available not to the general broad public in German, but rather to the IGAAP membership through that online presentations, and also through written reports that were published for the IGAAP membership, and maybe a few hundred more books were sold of each of these IGAAP reports. And well, basically for me, it was because I thought that the hard sciences in the UAP UFO field are often neglected or ignored, and especially when it comes to biology. And there were things claimed that as a trained biologist, I couldn't just let it stand like it is. So Steve and I decided that we want to be available, make this work available to the broader public in English. And that's how the whole thing started. So for me, it was to prove the worth and the value of science in general and molecular biology in particular to the broader public.
Did you write the book aimed at a particular audience? We're dealing with a great deal of technical information here. Is it the book written really for other PhD level folks, or for laymen, or for everybody?
I understand the difficulty of the information. The aim or the goal of the book is not to interest only PhD level molecular biologists. Quite the opposite. We intend to attract the general readership who have no advanced degrees in biology at university level or even a PhD, but rather more like the broader readership who have some knowledge of biochemistry and biology in general. And that's why we broke it down and simplified the terms and expressions and wordings in the book compared to a real scientific paper.
You chose to tackle one of the most controversial cases or overlapping cases in many decades, best known as the Nazca mummies. I remember when the case first broke, and for me, I'll just say it right now, the fact that Jaime Maussan was very deeply involved in introducing this material to the world made me somewhat circumspect. I like and respect Jaime, but it's a different culture in Central America around this phenomena, and often dovetailing with sensationalism. And so there was immediate reaction in the American community of just backing away. Unfortunately, that led to a dismissal of this case as a fraud to start with for many people, which was a disadvantage to serious researchers like yourselves. Why did you choose the Nazca mummies case? And can you summarize the different types of mummy artifacts that you found yourself addressing here?
Okay, I can probably answer the first part of your question. Why did we decide on tackling that particular case? Just because it was so controversial. And I completely agree. When I first saw that those mummies, especially the little ones, 60 centimeter in length, and the faces, I thought I was reminded of that movie figure E.T. Of the 1982
Yeah.
movie by Steven Spielberg, and I thought to myself, "Wow, this can't be right." But then, exactly, that's the ET-like face, and the resemblance was quite strong, and I thought this is impossible that it's real.
Yeah.
But then I listened to the entire presentation that was done by those scientists that were also in the group of Jaime Maussan, and they were quite convincing. But then there were media publications and everything what was getting quite complicated. And I thought to myself, okay, just for myself, I want to know if this is real or not. And I started looking into the details, into the medical and scientific details. And in the end, it turned out that I came to the conclusion they are real. Steve, your turn. How many different versions do we have there?
Well, there's a guy called Thierry Jamin, who's a French guy, a culture specialist in pre-Columbian South American culture and art, and he ran an institute in Cuzco. And in 2016, he was approached by some. My Spanish isn't very good, but I think the word is huscaqueros or something like that. They are tomb raiders who take pre-Columbian artifacts and look for them in the caves and countryside around Nazca, and they try and sell them to rich collectors around the world as precious artifacts, which most of them are.
Sure.
And Thierry Jamin was approached by a small group of these people who brought with them small, as Andreas said, small 60 centimeters, which is maybe 2 feet long, mummified beings, and asked if, and there are also completely different artifacts, which were giant hands, 3 giant hands, mummified hands, which had gold discs embedded in the palms, solid gold discs with covered in hieroglyphic type signs. And these hands were of the size that if they were scaled up to human or ape size, the creatures would have been 8 feet tall. And these and the small mummies together were brought to Thierry Jamin by these Spanish, basically tomb raiders, who has said, we found these in a cave in the Nazca region, and between Palpa and Nazca, and we want to know if they're worth anything, and can we sell them? And there were, to cut a long story short, there were 8 of these small. They call them humanoid reptiles. They're 60 centimeters in length from top to toe. Most of the mummies were mummified, lying completely flat, like Egyptians from the pharaonic period who were mummified. And they are, Andreas can say a little bit about the mummification process in a minute, because that's very important in them. They're being preserved so well. Also, so there was these 3 mummified hands and these little creatures, 60 centimeter long creatures. And there was a third type of being, which was excavated as well, which were roughly the size and morphology of modern humans, about 5 feet tall and quite skinny, but recognizably human looking. However, these all these creatures, the giant hands, the small reptilian creatures, and the human-like creatures, they were all tridactyl, which means they had no thumbs and then no 4th finger, and they just had 3 very, very long main digits on the end of each limb, 3 fingers, 3 toes. And they all had this morphology. So there's some genetic connection between them all. And Also, the mummified human-sized figures were mummified in the seating position, which is how the pre-Columbian Nazca people buried their dead, sitting down and often mummified. So there were 9 of those, and they were all given names like, Josephina, Victoria, Albert, and so forth. Maria, and all the reptiles were given names and identifiable names as well. So there were 9 of these human hybrids. There were 8 of the humanoid reptiles, and there were 3 giant hens. And there were a number of other artifacts and creatures found as well, like remains of some parts of these creatures that weren't connected together. They were scattered all over the place. So over the centuries, they'd probably been got at by predators or something. And there are artifacts like stones, like hand-sized stones, that seem to be carved with the faces of alien faces with big black eyes, and all these were carbon dated. All the mummies are carbon dated to between, the most recent ones were 1,250 years old, and the most ancient ones are 7,000 years old. And the carbon dating was repeated by different agencies in different parts of the world, like in Colorado and in St. Petersburg, and they all get the same results from their carbon-14 protocols. So we have a real mystery here that which demands a lot of looking into and a lot of scientific analysis, basically. So do you have anything to add to that, Andreas?
Yes, of course. You mentioned the carbon dating, C14. That's a method that's typically used for age dating biological materials, and it's based on an isotope of the carbon atom, which has a different number of neutrons and the same number of protons in it. This is a radioactive material, and its half-life is about 5,730 years. If you could just show that image for a moment.
The image is a graph with a kind of curved graph going along.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So on this graph, you see, if you have at the beginning of the time point 0, let's say you have 1 million particles of radioactive material, in this case, carbon-14, after the half-life, which is T1/2, you have 500,000 left, which means the half-life is the time that is the period of time that elapses until half of the radioactive material is decayed. So in this case, after T1/2, it's left 500,000. After the same time again, 2 times T1/2, it's 250,000, and then it goes down to 125,000 and so forth. For carbon-14, that number, the half-life, is 5,730 years, which means you can actually quite precisely date biological material within a span of ranges, maybe 50 plus minus 50 years or so. Of course, there is a limit where the decay curve tends to go down to 0. For carbon-14, it's about 50,000 to 80,000 years maximum dating range. So actually, this particular carbon dating, that was what convinced me in the first place that these mummies are actually real.
It's one thing to be a believer, and Lord knows this world is filled with many people who emblemize the mantra of the X-Files, I want to believe. Other people, I don't want to believe. When confronted, though, by a deeply scientific, pragmatic analysis that gives us a result that makes some people anxious, to put it mildly, we are faced with some theoretical constructs. My first thought is, should we, based on what we're learning here, simply deduce that these beings are extraterrestrial in nature, or some possible strange human mutation, if you will, or mammalian mutation that were, of course, treated very specially in their lifetimes by the regulation sort of humanoids around them, or that these beings are definitely from another place?
Well, the concluding part of the book concerning these Nazca mummies, we do present 5 possible alternative origins for them, but we won't summarize them now, because the journey between where we are and this and where you get to, having after all the scientific data has been analyzed and the DNA has been looked at and everything has been examined, is quite a long and complicated and sophisticated journey. So the conclusions are reached at the end of that, when we take in all the DNA evidence and all the biochemical evidence and so forth. But we do come up with some possible origins from them. One of those possible origins is that they might be extraterrestrial. I know it was from a different biosphere in the galaxy, but that's only one possibility, and it's not even the strongest one. We think it's possible but unlikely, but some other explanations of their existence are surprisingly more plausible, and none of them involve fakery. They're real biological beings, which were interred in the ground, all those years ago. Andreas, you want to talk a little bit about the preservation, how the diatomaceous earth and cadmium chloride?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Diatomaceous earth is one of a very strong agent that draws fluids out of living bodies, and therefore leading to mummification. And in those particular geographic conditions in the Nazca Valley, where they were found, it's dry, it almost never rains, that's one thing. Diatomaceous earth they were covered in diatomaceous earth, plus on top of everything, on top of that, they were also covered by another substance which is highly toxic. It's a salt, it's called cadmium chloride. And that still remains somewhat of a mystery even to us. We don't know when it was put on those mummies, and who did it, and why. So what we do know is that cadmium chloride as a substance was chemically engineered for the first time sometime around in the 19th or the 20th century. The exact date we couldn't research. It's not public domain. But both substances, diatomaceous earth and cadmium chloride, are strong desiccants, which means they draw fluids from living bodies, decaying bodies, and because of that, they lead to mummification. The basic essence and the secret of mummification is that these bodies need to be any kind of fluid. Watery fluid needs to be removed from the body, and because of that, microorganisms can no longer do their job and decay the organism. And when the fluid is gone, no more degradation, no more destroying of the body, and that is why these bodies came to be mummified. Why they are precisely in those locations in the Nazca Desert, we don't know. The reason why we think that the ET hypothesis in this case would be rather unlikely is because of the evidence that was presented by the group of Marsan. They looked at the DNA. There are other strong indicators that these are not extraterrestrial. We don't know exactly. That's why we came up with 5 potential options. Yeah. ET is one of them. A hoax would be another one. like many media proclaimed that this was nothing but just an elaborate hoax. But looking at the scientific evidence, there is DNA. There is basically morphology and anatomy of those entities are very terrestrial looking. DNA by itself, it would be, to me, it would be an extreme surprise if it turns out that DNA, the exact molecule, DNA as we have it here on Earth, if that molecule would be present as the genetic material on other planets somewhere out there in the void of the universe, wherever they may have come from. So we needed to come up with different explanations for the potential origin. And let me explain a little further on the anatomy and the morphology. Morphology is looking at the outer body, how it looks from the outside. That's anatomy, but we can leave it like that. No, let's leave it. So what we see here is a bipedal organism, very much looking like a vertebrate organism, a terrestrial vertebrate organism with the three parts, big parts of the body: head, thorax, and abdomen. There are four limbs, 2 legs, 2 arms. And what we see here on each of those arms is 3 fingers, like Steve already indicated, tridactyl, no thumb, no 4th digit. But also what we see here is the neck is very long. The rib cages or rib arches are completely closed except the bottom 2. There is a radiation tight something in the chest, which has a specific form. It's turned out exactly this is made of metal, an alloy composed of cadmium chloride, osmium, and a few other metals. So it's a highly toxic thing that was found inside the body. The skin was closed over it. It was not just added post-mortem. It was part of the body. And also what was found inside those bodies were intact tissues, and in the lower belly, you see those 3 parts. Those are eggs. And there were imaging techniques were used, MRI, to actually find out what these eggs are, these things are, and it turned out it was eggs, and they were organic. And to my big surprise, it turned out that the embryos that were found inside those eggs were pretty much looking like embryos at different development stages of just terrestrial vertebrate organisms.
Yeah.
We Mr. Haeckel's bioenergetic law, yeah. So I think we have a picture of that. Yeah, it's a Peter. It's a big picture with lots of little figures all over it, and it's black and white. That's it.
Yeah.
That's the one.
Yeah, that's it. What you see here is you see a number of vertebrate organisms from the left to the right: fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. And there's 4 different types of mammals. And when you look at the first top 2 rows, the top row in particular, then you see that these organisms are of different, not related vertebrate organisms in their early developmental stages look very much the same. When you go to the middle row, it's already different. And of course, the bottom row, there you see the differences. Even within the group of mammals, they are looking quite different. So Haeckel phrased his law, and it says that the ontogenesis, which means the individual development during embryogenesis, is a quick and fast recapitulation of the phylogenesis, which means the evolution. Haeckel thought that this was universally true. Today we know it's not universally true. It's limited to certain embryonic stages and also only to a number of tissues, not for the entire body. But it still applies. Haeckel's law is still valid even today.
Yeah, but we can come back to the fact that these eggs inside these reptiles. There were two of these humanoid reptile figures. One was called what were they called? Louisa, I think one was called Josephina and Louisa. They were sexed, because they were slightly different. They all had very reptilian characteristics. Like there was another one. The skin on her back was very, very well preserved, and it's almost identical to a snake or reptile. So they seem to be reptilian, and they all have the two females have these eggs inside the uterus, and they all, when CT scans or whether it's MRI, I suppose, were done of the eggs, they have they do follow this Haeckel's biogenetic law. So they look like that they follow terrestrial laws of the evolution and development, which suggests that they're not really extraterrestrial. We can't rule it out completely, but it just suggests they have a relationship to terrestrial biology, biological organisms.
You put forward 5 hypotheticals, 5 possibilities, with the understanding that you've been objective as possible in establishing these models. Do you personally lean toward one or two as what you feel is the most likely, or some deeper intuition of where the origins are? Either one of you can respond, or both.
Okay.
Andreas is a scientist.
Yeah, of course. Okay. Given the fact that we cannot prove any of those really to the point where beyond any doubt, my personal feeling is that one or two, maybe I favor one or two. The first one would be time travelers, that for some reason, and I will come to the evidence that supports that idea. Time travelers, that these entities may have come from the very far remote future of our planet. You see, tridactyl organisms are not really known in history of this planet so far, not in the way they were shown during that presentation in the Mexican Parliament. Tridactyl organisms like that are not known through evolution so far. Yet still, the group of Moissan did DNA testing, and they came up with evidence and results. So if we presume that DNA couldn't really be, or at least not the DNA type, the exact very same DNA type that we have here, as for the ET hypothesis, then the ET hypothesis is pretty much ruled out simply by that fact. So the DNA points towards a terrestrial origin of some kind, which may be from the far distant future, and they somehow, in some way, ended up in a time that is for us about 1,500 to 7,000 years in the past. How they got there, nobody knows, not for sure. That idea is supported by the DNA evidence. The group of Moissan did DNA testing. They came up with results, and they did PCR and sequencing for that. And And they deposited their results, the data of those sequences with the NCBI, the National Center for Biotechnology Information, which is just by doing it is a very strong indicator that those results are not fake. They must be genuine and real. So they took 4 samples, and 2 out of them got really good results. And if anybody wants to go to the NCBI and look it up, 2 samples got good results, and in 1 sample designated 0002, they found that 36% of the DNA sequences did not match with any kind of terrestrial DNA sample to compare with other species. In the other sample, that number was even much higher. It was 64 point something % that did not have any match and identical or remote relatives within terrestrial species. That means if we took DNA as a terrestrial origin indicator, we also take anatomy, physiology, Haeckel's law, like we just explained, in the embryo, the positioning of the embryos inside those eggs were followed strictly. Haeckel's law. We have to conclude that these entities come from a planet Earth, either in the future or as an alternative from a different parallel universe.
Do you think there's any possibility that while the remains in question have a terrestrial origin, that somehow they may be from the remote past rather than our future?
Theoretically, that is possible, but then the question remains, how would they have gotten there?
Why don't we find them anywhere else?
And
haven't we so far found any other examples of them?
Yeah,
in
Steve, very good point, Steve. If they had indeed, if in the past there had been species like those tridactyl 60-centimeter entities or those huge 2 to 8 foot entities, if they had been part of the terrestrial part past and of this planet, then we should have found many more examples, like we find examples of dinosaurs, fossils, and everything else. We don't.
Yeah.
This is the first time ever that something like that has been reported. So taking those far-fetched conclusions, remote, distant future, and they somehow got here, or from a Earth of a different universe, or from a different timeline. Those are the 3 options that remain. And okay, yeah.
I guess also disqualifying coming from the remote past would be supported by this metallic structure within their bodies. I mean, can we only deduce that this was introduced into this bioorganism surgically? It certainly wasn't born with it, I would imagine.
Well, was it introduced surgically? Most likely, yes. What we can say is that the skin above those implants was closed. So, and from everything I can tell, the wounds that must have been left after the implantation of those devices were closed, which means they were healed.
Yeah. Whew. It's real.
There's another small detail about this. The tridactyl digits on all the mummies have an unusual number of phalanges, like humans have 3 phalanges, from the knuckle to the fingernail.
Yeah.
There are 3 phalanges. All these humanoid reptiles, we have 3: the fingernail, this section, and this section. The 3 humanoid reptiles all have 4 phalanges, so that's their fingers are especially long. And the giant mummified hands, severed or separated mummified hands, have 6 phalanges. So that would have conferred an extremely complex degree of dexterity to them. But the absence of thumbs is remarkable. If these creatures were living the kind of lives that we do, we just don't know how to make sense of it. All we can do is say that is the case. They've all got them. They've all got this characteristic. And the anatomy, they've got a number of CT scans were done, and a number of MRI scans are done, and there's no evidence of any fakery or amputations, except in one case, which is a baby, which is called the baby Wawita, and that's the only one where there's some evidence of any surgical intervention in it, possibly after death, maybe before death, maybe just after birth. But in all the other adult species, in all the other examples, there's about 20 odd of them. They've all got this tridactyl arrangement with no thumbs and no 4th digit. And
is there,
yeah.
Any, technically, can we make any assumptions based on body mass versus cranial capacity about how relatively large their brains might have been? Not that is a determinant, that governs everything, but again, thinking like a tree sloth that I think has 3 fingers and that's it, basically it. It's if your cranial, if your intellectual development is such that it surpasses ours by millennia, perhaps you can get a lot done with 3 digits. Any thoughts? We're really talking in hypothetical territory here now, I know, and appreciate that.
Yeah, of course, that's my territory again here as a biologist. Well, from what I can say, the skull of those 60 centimeter like entities seems in relation to the body size. No, that's a different type of mummy.
Come back to that.
Right. For the small ones, the cranium seems to be unusually big compared to the body size in general, which, of course, as you said, is not necessarily a determinant as to how intelligent or how resourceful these entities might have been, but it's a general indicator for what they might have been able to do. The same is true for those Maria type of mummy that was just shown, the big ones. The very same is true there. Perhaps even more so when you look at the size of the skull and compare that to the body in general. So there is some evidence that they might have been quite resourceful. Still, those tridactyl limbs is still a mystery to anybody in the field, because this is not known through terrestrial evolution so far here on this planet.
Let me ask you, is part of the original controversy, debate, confusion, attacks on these beings based on one or more being fabricated, the other ones being authentic? But of course, as they say, one rotten apple can ruin the bunch. Was it established that any of these beings, these mummies, were artificially assembled, so to say?
Steve?
There is no evidence of that at all. I mean, in fact, that all the testing on them as that hoaxing is not a feasible solution to these to this phenomenon at all. There's too much in-depth biological analysis, too much biological data, which reveals that they almost certainly were living organisms at the one time, and that they preserve for in one case 7 millennia, and in the other cases up to 2 millennia. It's curious that the human-looking ones, the humanoid, they're called human hybrids by the scientists that have studied them in the Nazca area. They have a larger cranium than a human of equivalent body size, not a modern human of equivalent body size. They have completely different ear canals, which we've got to by CT scans, and they have fingerprints not even remotely related to any human or hominid specimen. They're quite different. So there's a number of areas in which they differ in quite surprising ways, even though the overall body morphology looks quite human. When you dig into it, they're not human.
And I should say here that when X-rayed, there's a skeletal structure in here. It's
there is.
It's the real deal. Also, can Andreas, the chemical that you referred to that's highly toxic that was found coating, is that what we're seeing here? This white surface?
Cadmium chloride.
Yeah, it could be cadmium. The substance was cadmium chloride. It's possible, but I rather would say that this doesn't look like the coating is still present there, and it looks like it's more like the skin, the mummified skin, that has decolorized for some reason.
Yeah, I'm damned if this is just, even one works in the lay field of anomalous phenomena, UFOs, UAPs, and their implications. This is all, this is still very difficult to wrap one's head completely around. We know, of course, about the tradition here in established cultures, Egypt being the best known, of mummification, and that culturally, not that regular folks weren't mummified, but it was, the best work was reserved for the most honored people, the most powerful people in a society. Can we make any deductions whatsoever parallel to that, or really not, because we don't have an oral history from the Nazca area residents or ancient writings about these beings, or do we?
Steve?
I'm not an expert on pre-Columbian South American civilizations, but obviously there was a lot of sophistication in the way they built stuff. The Incas and the Maya and so forth, the Incas in particular, but the Nazca people were not the Incas. They were a different set of people who built an astounding network of the lines, the 19 square miles of desert that are only properly visible from a mile up in the air. The geoglyphs that have been carved into the desert, and the ceremonial city of Cahuachi looks like some alien city. Everything's flat and very futuristic looking, even though the city is 2,000 years old. And they built a very large network of underground water supply systems with pipes and so forth. So it was in some ways very sophisticated civilization technologically, But these mummified beings just don't seem to be a part of everyday life there. They just, they don't belong anywhere, but there they are. The thing is, there they are. You've got to acknowledge their reality, and then investigate and come up with where they might have originated, because there they are. People handle them. They've been X-rayed, they've been photographed, they've been DNA sampled, they've been radiocarbon dated, and so forth. And we've got an awful lot of scientific data on them, and there they be. And you can't wish them away. They're not going to disappear.
That's exactly it.
I think if any one point has been made and verified in this first hour of the show, they're there and they're not going away. We're dealing with a real phenomena.
Yeah,
I want to say the graphic that you chose for the cover of your book was particularly, it just really got to me. Is something about the counter positioning, what we're looking at here, and I think you've chosen a remarkably good title for your book.
Thank you.
The graphics actually designed by Andreas, but we brainstormed ideas to get the different elements in the picture.
I also want to say to listeners, viewers, this book is beautifully laid out and put together, and the illustrations are first rate. They are scientific level, they are medical level. It's just a beautifully realized project. We will cover this again at the end, toward the end of the show, but I know your website is being worked on right now, but what is that link?
It's investigatingtheimpossible.info.
Great.
Investigating the impossible, no punctuation, just investigatingtheimpossible.info.
We are going to take a quick 4-minute break. Be with you back at the end. Stay with us. See you shortly.
The UNX Network presents a health and wellness spiritually based brand of hemp-derived CBD products made by Hopewell Farm in Harrogate, Tennessee. We apply our Cathara energy work with all of our plants and products. Our products made in small batches with only 2 ingredients of pure hemp, full spectrum crude oil, and coconut-derived MCT oil. Third-party lab tested for potency and legal THC levels with 6 strengths of 1 ounce oil to choose from. Know what you're buying and get what you pay for from Hopewell Farm. Applied directly to a specific area, Hopewell Farm topical salve in 1 ounce and ½ ounce sizes, made with pure hemp crude oil, comfrey extract, and all natural ingredients. Find the Hopewell Farm link and coupon code on the UNX Network website at unxnetwork.com. That's unxnetwork.com. The new book, How to Research a Haunted House by paranormal investigator Margie Kay and professional researcher Violet Wisdom, is now available from UNX Media. This one-of-a-kind book explains how to do research on a house with uncommon methods and resources used by historic home researchers, and how to determine who may be doing the haunting and why. How to Research a Haunted House can be used by homeowners, renters, investors, and it should be in the library of all professional paranormal investigators. Get this unique book at unxmedia.com or amazon.com. That's unxmedia.com or amazon.com.
And welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth. My special guest today, my old friend Steve Aspin and his co-author, Dr. Andreas Lück. And we are discussing a very serious subject, but sometimes you can't discuss subjects like this without some humor. And we have been having some. Before we jump back in, Steve, I just wanted to remind folks of your first book, which is a paradigm shifter as far as I'm concerned. It is one of the greatest abduction-related studies ever written, as far as I'm concerned. It's the best book of its kind since Bud Hopkins was working and at the top of his form. I encourage you to get it, as well as, again, the Investigating the Impossible, the book that we have been discussing this first hour. And moving on, I'm going to open with this schematic, and you can jump right in and tell us what we are looking at and what it represents.
All right, that's ball is in my court. I think what folks see here is the schematic of an animal cell. And when you really look at it very closely, you see that it's packed with a lot of things. I don't want to go into the real details here.
Sure.
But what you can see is that it's packed with things that all function. There is a lot of traffic between the individual compartments of a cell. The cell is surrounded by a cell membrane, which has a specific chemical composition and structure. And of course, it has a function. All these organelles in there, mitochondria, the nucleus, the Golgi apparatus, endoplasmatic reticulum, and everything else have very specific functions. And they interact with each other in various ways, starting from the genetic material to the gene expression to trafficking of proteins. Are they intracellular? Are they membrane proteins? Are they being secreted and have function elsewhere in the body? So in essence, what you see is that an animal cell, just as well as a plant cell, by the way, is an extremely complicated thing that is extremely sensitive to any kind of disturbance which interrupts or interferes with the proper function.
Does this schematic relate to a very famous case that you cover in depth in Chapter 2, the Peter Curie case? Is that related to this?
Indirectly. In the Peter Curie case, we're not really looking at the whole cell as the cell as a whole, but rather we are looking at certain organelles that we call mitochondria. Mitochondria are kind of like the power plants of the cell. You can't, they are there. It's, well, where are they? Mitochondria, right. These little reddish-like things that look like a peanut with a shell.
Just what I was thinking.
And those mitochondria are essential, absolutely required for the energy metabolism of any living organism on this earth. And what was the case in the Peter Curie case was that with mitochondria, they have their own genetic system. They have their own DNA. They have their own system for gene expression. Well, mitochondria are being transmitted from one generation to the next only through the maternal line, which means fathers do not transmit their mitochondria to their offspring, only mothers do. And in the Peter Curie case, we had a number of, let's say, questions that turned up after I read that book. Somebody in the IGAAP group asked me, do you know this book at some point? And I said, no. I had a closer look. I ordered it through Amazon. And then I started reading it. And Well, the encounter of Peter Corey with those two entities was very interesting and telling also, but
May I
also,
interrupt just a second? For the
go ahead.
members of the audience who are unfamiliar with this,
Yes,
the book
thank you,
Andreas
Steve.
is referring to is Hair of the Alien. That's written by a
Right.
researcher called
of course. The
Bill Chalker.
book.
Yeah, in
Bill Chalker
2005.
Yeah.
A great Australian researcher.
Right.
Indeed.
So thank you, Steve, for that. Now, it turns out that the hair that was recovered by Peter Corey after the encounter, that he kept in an unsterile plastic bag for a couple of years, that was then turned over to a investigative group called APEG, APEG, and they did a biochemical and molecular genetic analysis with this, and they came up with some interesting results, I would think, in so far that they found within the same hair, in different regions of the hair in the same mitochondria, they analyzed the hypervariable region of mitochondria. They found a couple of mutations or polymorphisms, one have to say, that indicate two geographic lineages, ethnic lineages that kind of like exclude each other.
Yeah.
One of those ethnic lineages was Chinese Mongolian, and the other one was Celtic Basque from Western Europe.
Yeah.
And according to biology, this really cannot happen because of the same thing that I just explained. Mitochondria are being transmitted from one generation to the next only through maternal lines, and within the same hair follicle. To have two different geographic lineages, ethnic lineages, isn't really possible.
Do we, whatever the lineage, at the same time as it's exotic and non-standard and a genuine mystery, at the same time, the extraterrestrial hypothesis does not really weigh in, do you think?
No, I don't think the ET hypothesis applies here for the same reason that we already discussed in part one of today's meeting. Those mitochondria are exactly 100% like human mitochondria.
Yeah.
So it's not only that the mitochondria are basically there, and they also have the same size of the mitochondrial DNA, and they have the same base sequence within the hypervariable region. They are exactly the same as human mitochondria, and simply because of that, I mean, anything is possible in the end, but chances are this is not ET.
So does that mean we're looking at the possibility that these beings are manufactured, that they're artificial and not biological in the way we understand it?
Indeed, that's my conclusion that I came up with. And this is based predominantly on the moment where Peter Corey, during this encounter with those two entities, bit a part of the nipple of that one entity off, and it got stuck in the lower throat of his trachea. And the reaction of that entity, I must say, was kind of like strange. If that would have been a normal human female, there would have been a lot of blood, there would have been a lot of wound secret, and a lot of pain.
What?
So that entity commented like, "Oh well, that wasn't just so great."
Yeah, he heard her in his head a comment, something like, "Well, that wasn't so great," which is not normally how you would respond if you were in great physical pain.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that wasn't so great. You might.
These things being understood, Steve, Andreas, what do you think is the most likely possible origin of the beings involved?
As strange as it may sound, and we may repeat ourselves here a little bit, we came, for obvious reasons, we came to the kind of like the same conclusion, like we had for the mummies. They could be time travelers, or they could be from a different universe where there is another Earth that is technology, which has a technology that's more advanced than ours presently.
But we know that their DNA seems, or they have DNA in their hairs, which seems identical to humans. Well, it is identical to humans. So you've got a lot of bridges to cross, to get over this river.
Yeah. Yeah, especially also when you consider how mitochondria came to exist in the first place. There is this hypothesis that's called the endosymbiotic hypothesis, which claims that many millions of years ago, actually billions of years ago, there was a primordial eukaryotic cell that ingested a primordial bacteria, and instead of digesting it and consuming it, they somehow developed a symbiotic relationship over the millions of years, and in the end, mitochondria developed out of that. Looking at the IT hypothesis, how likely does anybody think is that to happen again somewhere else in the universe?
Let's go on to the next schematic here.
Okay.
Can I just interject here? This is a section of the book which deals with the possibility of hybridization between an alien and a non-terrestrial species and humans. And Andreas and I looked at this, and he in particular did a lot of work on it in about 2 or 3 years ago. And the whole chapter is inquiring as to whether this would be possible, and if so, how would it work, and if not, how do we explain these reports that have come from thousands of people all over the world for 50 years now?
Let me jump in for a moment and just say, at this point, chapter 3, you segue to another subject, a very challenging one, and one which has had my attention now, I have to say, for most of my life. The idea of hybridization, dealing with humans and non-humans, in this case, a historical record that began in earnest in the 1970s with a small cadre of researchers in the UFO subject, looking at the possibility of beings that are part us and part them. It's a subject I have returned to and probably will for the rest of my life in this area of study. And I'm glad that you saved it for the third wave, so to say. The first 2 waves, so to say, are extremely challenging. But this is the elephant behind the brick wall, so to say, for me. And in an age when we're seeing more and more openness, or seeming to see more and more openness in the world of UFO studies, emblemized by the ongoing irregular activity in the American House of Representatives, a whole subculture of whistleblowers that we've come to know, American politicos, academics now who are striking out to dig into this subject like Andreas, but no longer in fear of losing their credibility, their life, their careers, which used to be the case. And for so many other areas of study, it's one of the reasons I feel this book, it's going to be a slow-moving tidal wave, people will hear about this book, and like Out of Time, Steve, I think word of mouth is going to make this a truly historic book. But you wait until we've gone through the Mummy story and the Peter Corey material to launch into this, and more power to you for doing it. So continuing here.
Well, yes, what you see here is a schematic of the cell cycle. The cell cycle is essentially the time that passes from one cell division to the next. And it depends actually a little bit on the species that we look at, and also on the actual tissue that we look at. There are cells like liver, like neurons in particular, that don't divide at all anymore. And then there are other cells like epithelial cells on the skin or elsewhere, or in the intestine, that divide rather quickly. What you can basically say, the cell cycle is divided into two phases. One is very big, called interphase, and it's composed of three different parts, G1, S, and G2. And then the M phase, called mitosis. Mitosis is the actual cell division, and the length of a typical cell cycle in a fast dividing cell, let's say skin epithelial cells, is around 24 hours. Out of those 24 hours, 21 to 22 hours are reserved for the interphase, and only 1 or 2 hours go into the actual mitosis. Now, mitosis in I don't really need to go into the details what exactly happens in what part of that cell cycle. But in the end, the result of mitosis is you have one cell at the beginning, and at the end, after 24 hours, you have two identical cells from one.
Okay, here's a big question, really. And, you know, human beings on Earth, especially the last decades, scientific procedures, breakthroughs in technology have brought us to points where we may be starting to deal with lower animal forms, well, you know, laboratory animals, the way that certain non-human species deal with us. Are there certain biological prerequisites that would have to be met for genuine hybridization between humans and, I'll say, non-humans in general, but in our area of study, most of these beings are usually referred to as grays or like grays, or in that area of non-human evolution?
Well, the answer is yes, but we have to look at them separately. When we say non-human, that includes other terrestrial organisms.
Sure.
Well, even hybridization of two terrestrial species is more than difficult to achieve and most likely to fail. Let me give you an example. In 1998, Wang and his group tried to fuse mouse cells and human cells, just as a very simple precursor of that kind of hybridization. So they took body cells, just ordinary somatic cells from mouse and from men, and they put them in a petri dish, and they fused those two cells. Humans have 46 chromosomes, mice have something like 40 chromosomes in a regular body cell, so that was already 80 plus chromosomes in that fused cell. And over time, it turns out that the experiment failed pretty much entirely because over time, entire chromosomes were lost during cell divisions. That was most likely due to difficulties in synchronizing the different species cell cycles with one another, and a number of other things that are directly or indirectly related to that, like DNA replication and a number of other things. So in the end, that experiment failed. and that is already happening between two terrestrial species. Now, for the ET hypothesis, when we look at that, we must go much more into very, very basic things. The basic metabolism or the basic structure, everything, the biology of those ETs must be based on the carbon atom, just like in all species on this planet. The genetic material must be DNA, and exactly the type of DNA that we have if it's supposed to work. The gene expression must be exactly the same with an intermediary molecule called messenger RNA, with protein factories that we call ribosomes, with amino acids that need to be exactly the same encoded in the DNA, the same in terms of structure, behavior, and everything else. Also, the neural system needs to be the same. Sensory system needs to be similar or identical. And the list is long, and I could add on and on and on.
Sure.
So, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
It's going to be extremely difficult. And what I did in that work, was to take out a few central areas and lay them out and say, okay, this is the human biology, and this is what bioengineers on the ET would need to consider. What you see here is gene expression. On the top, you see a primary RNA transcript, which is an exact copy of the DNA, only with a different type of molecule that's called ribonucleic acid. And what you see there is you see exons and introns, exon 1, intron, exon 2, intron, and so forth. And then there is a process that's called RNA processing. In this step, the introns are being removed. They're being taken out by biochemical means. And what's left is a spliced RNA that's called messenger RNA, in which you see only the exons. Exons are parts of DNA, and that will be found in the resulting protein, and of course also in the resulting messenger RNA. What you also see here at the left side is a 5' cap. That apostrophe is pronounced prime, which is necessary for the stability of the mRNA. And at the right-hand side, you see a number of A's, which is abbreviations for the nucleotide adenine. And it's called poly-A tail, which is also necessary for different reasons. But each and every human messenger RNA will have a 5' cap and a poly-A tail. And also, before the actual translation at the ribosome can begin, there is a 5' UTR untranslated region and a 3' untranslated region. So now I already killed you with my exploration into molecular biology.
Yes,
we're not dead. We're not dead yet.
I'm correcting myself right now. You remind me, the great Mark Twain, the American humorous writer, gave us hundreds of wonderful quotes. One I'm going to bastardize a bit, but it was roughly, of all God's creatures, the one that cannot be made to go under the lash is the cat. And he discusses the cat's tremendous internal freedom and mastering their own self. And it ends by saying, if man could be bred with the cat, it would improve man, but it would degenerate the cat. Okay. And
point taken.
That's not fully scientific, but appropriate in the moment. One of the realities of non-human contact, and I say reality based on decades of study and access to the studies of other colleagues, is in certain confrontations between non-human, and we can possibly assume extraterrestrial, but certainly human and non-humans, there is a sense that your mind is being probed. It's been wonderfully illustrated in science fiction, Star Trek, and other movies and shows. But the three of us take this very seriously. And you introduce this at this point in chapter 3. Can you talk a bit about why you take it as seriously as you do, and explanations for this and what it's about?
Okay, Steve, you begin.
Excuse me. I talked about this in my previous book, Out of Time, a little bit. Why we go into this is that abductees, I think most of your audience would acknowledge that there are such people who have encounters with entities of various kinds, and the abduction program is intergenerational and so forth, and which I've written about in that previous book. Abductees always, if they're aware abductees, which they know what's going on, they've worked it out, they always complain, or they always comment on an episode of missing time. They can be sitting in a car and they can pull over by the side of the road to look at a light in the sky, and it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and instantly it's 7:15 in the evening and it's got dark, and the last thing they remember a second ago was looking at a light in the sky, and they've just gone. The 2 hours have just vanished.
That's right.
And there's no recollection. And there's thousands of abductees report this experience. It's seamless.
Yeah.
It's like you've cut a slice of time out, like an old-fashioned celluloid movie. If you cut a length out of it and just join the ends with tape, it's like that. It's just boom. It's just gone. Time is gone. And you can learn sometimes with assistance, like with hypnosis, but that's not really a very accurate description of the process. But you can learn to interrogate your memory and be patient and try to remember things, and try. And the next day, try and try. Just remember things from your real life, like try and remember something that happened when you were 4, which you haven't thought about for 40 years or 50 years. And in that exercising your mind will deliver the thing to you eventually. It will emerge, not maybe that day or the next day, but it will emerge. And what the abductors seem to be able to do is to bury the experience of the abduction, the period of the abduction, in the long-term memory.
Correct.
So this seamlessness, this missing time, is a major feature of it. But you can recover those missing time periods with enough practice and effort and serious work and patience. So the abductees talk about one of these gray aliens. Usually, sometimes it's another entity. They have these huge almond-shaped eyes, and they go right up to your eyeball, and they twist and turn their head around like that, and until something, and then the abductees report something happens, and they feel their mind is being invaded, and they've got all these thoughts racing through their minds, and they have mood changes very suddenly, like they have an enormous sexual desire, or they have a sense of spiritual oneness, or they have a great deal of anger coming up in them about something, or peace and tranquility. It's they're always, these extreme emotions race one after the other. And at the end of this process, sometimes the entity says to the abductee, you're not going to remember that. You're not going to remember anything that's happened today. You're just not going to remember it. So then that's a very matter-of-fact thing. They probably don't need to say that, but they're just kind of, occasionally they interact with you like that. But it's a very matter-of-fact statement. It's not a command like, you will not remember. It just, they're just telling you, you're not going to remember, so don't even try. But it seems like, to me, that when the abductees report this, something in the abductor is managing to lock into some the optic nerve in some way, that when they twist their head around and alter the angle, and they use that as a conduit into the brain, and they manage to somehow by some process they've mastered, they manage to bury the experience of the past 2 hours in that part of the brain where you can't access it. So when you come to, like in the car or walking down the street or in the living room on the sofa, this missing time is just gone, and you can get it, you can retrieve it, you can get it back, but it takes a lot of effort. So I think it's the entity, the abductor, locking into the optic nerve and doing this. Andreas, however, has a slightly different perspective on this.
Please.
So,
yes, absolutely. So me, again, being the biologist, looking at this from a purely biological
you're pulling rank on us now.
He's allowed.
Okay, so basically, on this, Steve and I agree to disagree. And I don't think we will find a joint conclusion, at least not in the near future. So from a biological point of view, you have to understand how the eye works and how the information that the eye takes up is being transmitted into the central nervous system. Basically, the eye works in a way there is light or some kind of information coming through the lens, the glass body, and then into the retina. Retina is made up of cells, cones, and some other type of cell. And those type of cell react only on electromagnetic stimulation. What they do is they transform this electromagnetic information into chemical information, and then they transmit this chemical information through a synapse from the retinal cell to the cell of the optic nerve. And from there, this information is being transmitted further, or maybe through one more step, or maybe 2 more steps, into the optic cortex in the back of the brain. So basically, what Steve proposes is way too complicated to achieve, and needs to, it needs at least 3 or 4 different stages that all needs to be somehow overcome by the entity that does the mind probing, and achieve to at least reach the optical cortex in the back of the brain. From there, it needs to get control of the rest of the body, the brain first, and then the rest of the body, which is a hell of a lot complicated. So,
do you feel, Andreas, that given the hypothetical that their technology, their understanding of biological science may be 50,000 years ahead of ours, that the laws and the rules that you're talking about, that we bump up against in our at the edges of our technology and understanding of what we're talking about here, that it could just be discarded and say, well, we're beyond that now, and in more of a science fiction realm, and it happens, and there are ways around, what a grounded, pragmatic scientist would be saying about it.
Yeah, I've heard those remarks quite a few times, and more often in the near past than in the more distant past. But the fact is, you cannot just eliminate the biology. Yeah. It's a fact. You can't. Yeah. Things don't work just like with a magic wand that you wave and everything is just fine. Everything just works the way you want. No. Human biology has been evolved over hundreds of thousands of years. The basic principles behind that, information gathering, processing of information, reacting to information, and the whole and complete biochemistry in general, have been evolved since the beginning of time on this planet.
Let me cut to a central point here. What is the actual difference between what we'll call hybridization and transgenesis?
Yeah, that's one of the central points that we need to address here, and it's a very important one. When you talk about hybridization, you would assume that it's 50% one species and 50% about from the other species. That would happen if, let's say, the hybridization could occur through regular normal fertilization. Then you would have 50% from that species and 50% from the other species. We don't see that. We actually don't see that. David Jacobs in his books categorizes those hybrids in quotation marks into 5 categories, with stage 1, early stage, being the closest one that I could think of being a true hybrid. But then the other categories, all the way up to the category 5, hybrids, are entirely different. Stage 4 and 5, hybrids and hybrids are completely indistinguishable from humans. So that's why I started to ask myself at some point, why is it that those hybrids do not show any kind of physical characteristic or feature from the other species, as they should if it was true hybrids?
I want to
go ahead.
Pose to both of you what I consider a hugely central question here. When the research community began to look into these other intelligences on their own, as opposed to confused with the technology, the UFOs, the UAPs, the highly technological craft of undetermined origin, events where beings would take a human being and examine them or put them through procedures. The euphemism that we used to use was they're experimenting. Dave Jacobs is certainly one of the pioneers in this work, along with Bud Hopkins, and he explained it to me maybe 30 years ago in a very simple way, that in the 1970s, when the research community was beginning, the research community was middle-aged white guys, which is probably pretty much still what dominates it. And their main concern was to be taken seriously. It was all right to discuss radar returns, declassified documents, lights in the night sky, trace cases. But when you started talking about beings, then you were crazy. And then the way Dave said it was, we were focused on the cars and not the drivers. And right. We are now taking close look at the drivers. And what do you feel, and it may be informed by great study or intuition, I'd like both of your thoughts on this. What could be the master plan behind abductions, and why the repeated collections of sperm and ova from the same abductees reported tens of thousands of times? It's just absolutely as real as it can be. What are your thoughts on why this continues, and what is their master plan?
Okay. The master plan, as I see it, is to actually take over Earth, pretty much in the way that David Jacobs already proclaimed this would happen, and it makes complete sense. Now, that's the ultimate goal, to take over Earth, and they do it because in this kind of like clandestine way, because they have to. They cannot openly invade. And why is that? Because, again, it's biology that prohibits them to do so. Because imagine this, you come from a different biosphere where everything is different, right? You cannot just come here, take off your helmet and say, hey, here we are the rulers now. So what happens? there are bacteria in the air, there are viruses in the air, there's all sorts of spores in the air. All of that, when they breathe, they take into their bodies, which can be fatal for them. So they have to find a different way to take over Earth and perhaps integrate this solar system within the empire or federation or however you want to call it.
Yeah.
So basically, what is the way to do it? They produce transgenics. And coming back for a moment to your initial question, what's the difference between hybridization and transgenesis? The difference is in true hybridization, you have a 50-50 genetic match from one species and the other one. In transgenesis, you are human, and that's what I think these hybrids of David Jacobs are really. They are human, but they are transgenics. They're transgenic organisms, which means they have one or maybe a few more extra genes that normal humans do not have, somehow, somewhere integrated. And I hear, just in recent weeks, I hear a couple of things like extra DNA detected or something like that. Maybe there is something to it, maybe there isn't. I don't know. I can't judge that. But also, what supports the idea of being transgenic is that certain abilities of the grays diminish or are almost completely lost in those hybrids. For example, mind probing. Telepathic communication remains to some degree, but they are no longer capable, like the tall grays are, to control the human subject. They can do that only as a group of hybrids that they kind of like control a human subject. So now, why do they need to do that? What's the ultimate goal? So that they produce those transgenics, and in order to do so, they need constant supply of sperm and ova. So they take sperm and ova from human subjects, from abductees on board of their craft, put them in a petri dish of sort, then let it grow to the 2, 4, or 8 cell stage, then implant the embryo into a non-pregnant human female, which then all of a sudden out of nowhere feels, hey, I'm pregnant. How the hell did that happen? Yeah. And then at the end of the first trimester, they remove the fetus again. The reason why this needs to be implanted in a host organism is not completely clear to me, but I think there may be some indication that it may have control with morphogenic substances or hormonal control.
Yeah.
So after the end of the first trimester, they remove that. The woman says, what the hell is going on here? Where is my baby? It's gone.
Yeah.
Now, in my imagination, I think then what happens next is that embryo at the 3-month stage is then being placed either into a second host, which carries the baby to term, or being placed into a synthetic uterus of sort, where the baby grows to term and then is being removed from that, and then it needs to be integrated into the alien society. But as it is a human baby, it needs emotions, and that's where the abductees come in that are being ordered or asked to take care of those babies and give them emotion and love and this and that.
Yeah.
So now, taking this a little further, then the kid grows and becomes a toddler, a young adult, and it grows, it goes to school of sort in that alien society. It gets accustomed or maybe indoctrinated even with their societal goals and aims and customs and everything. And then it will be, at one point, it will be told, you are supposed to be on Earth at some point, and we train you now for that. And this is where all the abductees come in that need to do their job by training those kids, those hybrids. Now, what's the ultimate goal is, of course, to take over, but in a way that we don't really realize what is going on there.
Yes.
And still they can achieve their goal. And in the end, they put people in power that actually are like moles in a way, and they act in favor of them instead of rather acting for us.
And this whole process may be going on right now under our noses for decades already.
Right.
Yep. We're coming into the end of our time here together. Again, I want to thank you both, not just for being my guest today, but for undertaking a really Herculean effort. This is such a challenging project, and your focus has been really laudatory. I just congratulate both of you and look forward to following how this book is received by both the UFO-related community, the scientific community. And again, please give us the website where I know it's under works right now, but where people can go and learn more about investigating the impossible.
If you're going to post this on KGRA at the end of the year, like 29th of December, you said around about then, I think the website will be finished by then, definitely. Right. It's investigatingtheimpossible.info. Investigatingtheimpossible.info.
And Steve, I'm going to ask you very quickly again to give us the URL for Out of Time and information on this wonderful book.
Sure, that's outoftimebook.info. Outoftimebook.info. Okay.
Steve Aspin, Dr. Andreas Lück, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for having us.
Yep.
It's a difficult subject, isn't it? Yeah.
It was my honor. And
just before we sign off, I just mentioned that, we've talked about a lot of deep science and biological science and genetic science in this interview. The book has a lot of that in there, but we've tried to make it an interesting story that everybody can follow, and it's written not exactly dumbed down, but it's written in such a way that you'll be able to follow it. Yeah. And you might have to read a couple of sections twice, but basically it's a good narrative story which builds to all these interesting conclusions and leaves the door open for other work to follow.
I'm going to thank you both again, and I ask that you stay well, fight for what you believe in. Bye for now.